fruits, nuts, and seeds.
Chapatti, thank you for teaching us to be healthy.
The energy that I feel with these meals.
Chapatti, that was really yummy.
Like a kid with new toys. Health is my greatest joy. Come and see, come and be with our host Chapatti.
Hello, welcome. This is Food with Life. I'm your host Chapatti, and now we learned a little bit about GMO from our last show with our wonderful guest, Mr. Jeffrey Smith, best-selling author of Seeds of Deception and Genetic Roulette. I tell you, Mr. Smith, welcome to have you. Welcome to have you.
Thank you.
Nice to be here with you. I have a question. You know, there's research now on the GMO, and much of the research is done by the companies who are producing GMO. Yes?
Yes.
Now, it seems like this research is biased in a certain direction.
Exactly.
So how objective is that research, and what is the validity of it?
Well, you see, as I said last show, that the biotech companies like Monsanto are in charge of determining if their own genetically modified foods are safe. The FDA doesn't require anything. And so they're the same companies that told us PCBs were safe and DDT was safe and Agent Orange was safe, and now they're telling us that GMOs are safe. But when you look at the actual research that they do, it turns out that it's designed to avoid finding problems. These companies have bad science down to a science. They use the wrong control groups, the wrong length of study, the wrong detection methods, the wrong statistics, and we've analyzed it, and it turns out some of their studies show actual signs of toxicity and higher death rates that they simply ignore.
I don't understand. How can it be research? It does not seem to be objective or scientific.
Well, one example, when Monsanto wanted to show that its genetically engineered bovine growth hormone,
Yes.
which is injected into cows, they wanted to say it didn't interfere with the fertility of cows. But when documents were stolen from the FDA and later made public, it revealed that the Monsanto scientists apparently secretly added cows to the study that were pregnant before they were injected. When some researchers wanted to show that the bovine growth hormone milk, that the bovine growth hormone in the milk is destroyed during pasteurization, they apparently pasteurized the milk 120 times longer than normal and also spiked it with extra hormones.
I know this takes out much of the nutrition, the pasteurization, the homogenization, all this. Now, the doctors in America, many of them are prescribing non-GMO
That's
to their
right.
patients.
That's right.
It seems to be something funny is going on here, because much of the biotech companies are pushing the research for the research on the GMO, and the doctors are shying away from this and going in their own direction.
That's because a few scientists actually do independent research. And they find in virtually every study that they do, organ damage and higher death rates and reproductive problems. Unfortunately, what typically happens when an independent scientist discovers adverse findings on genetically modified foods is they're either fired from their job, or silenced with threats of a lawsuit, or forced out, or threatened, or they lose funding. And I've interviewed many of these scientists, and I write about them in both Genetic Roulette and Seeds of Deception. I'll give you an example.
Yes.
There was a senior scientist from the Russian Academy of Sciences who fed genetically modified soy to mother rats before they got pregnant, and then continuing through pregnancy and lactation. More than half of their babies died within 3 weeks, compared to only a 10% death rate among those that were fed non-genetically modified soy. They also found, one scientist found that when he fed rats genetically modified potatoes, the rats had potentially precancerous cell growth and smaller brains, livers, and testicles, partial atrophy of the liver, and damaged immune system after only 10 days. Now, in the first case, the Russian scientist got off easy. She was only told no more research on GMOs because her boss was pressured by his boss. The other scientist with the potatoes, he was fired from his job after 35 years, silenced with threats of a lawsuit, and they put out a whole campaign to trash his reputation because his information was so damaging to the biotechnology industry.
I, I have nothing more to say. I'm astonished at this. And this is so important here because GMO foods come into our dairy, into our milk products. And this affects not only the people who are older, but more important, even the children.
Absolutely.
Children, when they're young, drink milk more than water, you know? And it is so essential that they have good organic milk. So tell me a little bit about this here.
Okay, the bovine growth hormone is a genetically engineered drug. It's injected into cows to increase milk supply, but it changes the quality of the milk. It creates an infection in the udder of many of the cows, which increases the pus in the milk and the antibiotics in the milk. It increases the bovine growth hormone in the milk. And most importantly, it increases a hormone level called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. Now, Chapatti, IGF-1 is linked in many studies to increased risks of cancer. Premenopausal women with high levels of IGF-1 are 7 times more likely to get breast cancer. Men with high levels are 4 times more likely to get prostate cancer. It's linked in lung and colon cancers. And the American Public Health Association just condemned the use of bovine growth hormone because of this link to IGF-1. Also, many people believe that the higher levels of IGF-1 in the milk is why the US statistics show higher levels of fraternal twins than in the UK, where it's banned. In fact, most countries ban the use of bovine growth hormone. Canada bans it, European Union bans it, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, not the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm your host, Chapatti. Stay with us. Don't go away. I'm holding Mr. Smith here so he does not leave. You stay here too. This is Food with Life. Welcome back to Food with Life. So I'm wondering, tell me about pesticides and this influence that pesticides have on the GMO products and the crops of this kind. What is the effect here?
Well, the herbicide-tolerant crops like the Roundup-ready soy and corn, cottonseed, canola, and sugar beets, you spray a lot more of the herbicide on those crops. In fact, in the first 13 years, 383 million pounds more of these pesticides, herbicides, were sprayed on the fields in the United States because of these GM crops. Now, when you spray it, the pesticide or the herbicide gets into the crop itself, and it accumulates in the air, in the product that we eat, like the kernels of the corn or the soybean. So it goes into our bodies. It also goes into the soil. And so it is toxic by itself. It's been linked to changes that might indicate it's cancerous or cause birth defects or cause other toxic issues. Certainly endocrine disruption, where it might suppress the ability for us to have children or to mature properly sexually.
Hormone.
Hormones, yeah, exactly.
It's complete.
Exactly. Now also, Roundup, or its primary ingredient called glyphosate, actually locks up certain nutrients so that they're unavailable to the plant, and also if we eat the plant, to human beings. So it can actually reduce the nutrient value of our food. It also creates general sickness among the plants, and it creates a whole different ecology of the soil where it kills out the beneficial bacteria and microorganisms and promotes disease-creating pathogenic microorganisms, and then weakens the defenses of the plant against those pathogens. And that's how it works. It weakens the defenses of the plant. It increases the amount of disease in the soil, which killed the plant. But this means that our whole food supply, anything that's planted on that field afterwards, because it accumulates over time, is also affected. It can last in the ground for 3 years or longer, depending on the climate and geography. So we're in a situation right now where we're drenching American fields with Roundup, and it's affecting the health of our plants, the animals, and humans, and also causing herbicide-tolerant weeds that become resistant to the weed killer, which means people are putting more herbicides on their crops, and also more toxic herbicides. So it's a real treadmill of toxicity.
So now that you've given us some beautiful knowledge, we need to know which products are indeed GMO and which products we should avoid and what products we could favor, so we know what to buy.
Well, There are 8 genetically modified food crops. There's soy, corn, cottonseed, which is used for oil, canola, sugar beets, which are used for sugar, Hawaiian papaya, a little zucchini, and a little crookneck squash. Those are the only 8 GM food crops. The seedless watermelons, that's not a result of genetic engineering, that's a result of natural selection. The tangelos, the pluots, all these things, when you combine, that's natural selection. That's sex, but it's not genetic engineering. So it's these 8 food crops, plus aspartame is a genetically engineered produced sweetener. And then there's genetically engineered bovine growth hormone, which is injected into cows to increase milk supply. And then, of course, the milk and meat from animals that are fed GMOs may be affected.
I'm going to stay away from it. But we're going to go into the kitchen to make some good organic foods and talk about foods we can use and have that are nothing with the GMO. Nothing to do with the GMO.
I look forward to that.
And we're going to say goodbye to Gali, Mali, and Ali. I'm your host, Chapatti. We'll be seeing you in the kitchen with our wonderful guest, Jeffrey Smith. See you in a minute. Stay with us. Bye-bye. This is Food with Life. Hello, and welcome back to Food with Life. I'm your host, Chapatti, and we're now in the kitchen with our wonderful guest, Mr. Jeffrey Smith, the expert on GMO foods, and our wonderful cooks, Mr. Steve Boss and Kathy Dubois. So tell me, we have all these delicious foods here. I'm not sure what we're going to do. Tell me, someone help me.
We're making a sort of risotto today, but we're using a different grain.
Oh.
We're using a farro. And Steve, you can explain what a farro is.
Well, farro is actually a progenitor of wheat. And the best way to characterize it is it's what the Roman legions lived on. And so it's a very hardy grain, and it's also a grain that many people who are allergic to wheat can actually eat. So gluten intolerant people, some of them can actually enjoy farro.
So we're going to start in the traditional way of making a risotto, which is usually with an olive oil and we're going to use red onion today, and celery and carrot. So I'll take that over to the stove and start it.
Good. And what Kathy's doing is she's building a flavor base. That's the whole idea behind it. It's called making a sofrito. And the flavor base is what's going to infuse all the other parts with just deliciousness.
Oh, I'm going up and down.
You're okay you're on that team, right?
Now, is this, what kind of cheese is this?
That is Parmigiano Reggiano. We're going to use that at the end.
All right.
It's a very, very classic cheese. It's called Pina cheeses from Italy.
So this is from Italy.
Yes, absolutely. Cannot be made anywhere else.
So I realized, wait. So maybe you're getting it, but are we safe with all these foods?
Well, traditionally, if something is from Italy or from Europe, it's not allowed to use genetically modified bovine growth hormone. It's banned in Europe, it's banned in Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So if something is from outside the US, essentially, it almost certainly does not have, it's not from cows injected with bovine growth hormone. Now, in general, if you buy something from Europe, other than milk and meat, it'll say made with genetically modified ingredients if it is made with GMOs. Because they have labeling there, they have labeling in most industrialized countries, but not in the United States. Even though 9 out of 10 Americans want labeling, the FDA, which is in charge of that decision, is told to promote the biotechnology industry, and they know that most Americans would avoid eating GMOs if they were labeled. So the reaction by the natural food industry is to put voluntary labels on the products saying non-GMO. Rather than being forced to say contains GMO, they're actually telling people it's non-GMO. And there's a new movement now around a standard called Non-GMO Project, which is a third-party verified standard that means that their claim is backed up. So you'll be looking for that kind of seal or label on packages.
But what about, we're going to use wine also as part of building the flavor base. And in the production of wine, are there any materials that you can add?
Well, there are, in general, you can have microorganisms used in the production of a variety of foods that are from genetically modified organisms. Like hard cheese, for example. Most of it